Well, good afternoon to everybody, or good morning to some of you. Hope everyone's doing well. So what we're going to look at today is just working with Microsoft Teams as a development platform. Now, the Teams development platform has been around, for a year, maybe 2 years, and it's been a little rough in the past because it's been such a moving target. And so one of the things that, I see now is things have really calmed down as far as things that are changing. And now there's some really neat things that you could do. So what I wanted to do is just kind of give you a head start into development. I assume some people haven't done development at all. So there's things like building the app manifest for the Teams app that you're building. There's using a utility called NGROK. So what I want to do is just kind of ground those fundamentals by doing demos. And as we go along, we're going to see a couple different things. So we'll start just with a section on an overview of Teams app development. And then we're going to look at developing custom tabs. And we're going to see that we have, the ability to do that with simple HTML and JavaScript, or if you want to use TypeScript in a Node.js project, or you want to work with Visual Studio, you can do that as well. I'm going to do a demo where I take a SharePoint framework web part and just do a little bit of work to it so it can be hosted as a tab in a Teams channel. We're going to look at bots, but before we look at bots, we're going to look at two easier entry points. So we have these new webhooks, and it kind of builds on what we had earlier, connectors, but what we'll see is that inbound webhooks just give you a quick way to post a message to a channel, and an outbound webhook gives you a very simple way to basically listen, to basically see what someone is basically adding into a channel. At the very end, we're going to look at working with bots. Bots is a huge topic, so maybe what I can show you is, how to get started, just getting them up and running inside of the local emulator, and, what's the approach of working with Azure and basically the Azure bot service to basically bring your bot framework components to fruition. Okay, so we got our work cut out for us. Now, when we work with Teams, I'm assuming that probably most of you know something about Teams just in order to have the interest to come watch this particular webinar today. So it's a chat-based system. Obviously Microsoft is, sees that Slack is one of the main competitors. But, what we're doing is we're trying to create chat-based work groups. And obviously everyone can see Microsoft's investment in Teams is pretty huge these days. You kind of worry about areas where Microsoft worked hard a year ago and then has moved on to other areas, and Teams is definitely, not an area that is, where Microsoft is skimpy on the investment. So I see picking up Teams developer skills, as a very good thing to have, as far as, in your quill of arrows to be able to, provide value as an Office 365/SharePoint developer. Okay, now one of the things that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go to the Teams Admin Center. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and I'm going to move back to my browser here, and I'll move back to a different version of the browser. And so if I go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, what I can do from here is to basically say show all admin centers, and here is the Teams Admin Center. So if you haven't worked with the Teams Admin Center before, as a developer, there's some settings there we're going to need to set. And that is not great. Let's go try that one more time. Let's see if I go to admin.teams, just trying to get to the Teams Admin Center. And finally, it gets me there. Okay, now what I want to show is that as a Teams developer, you're going to need to be able to upload app packages on the fly. And in a brand new tenant, you're not able to do that. So for instance, in one of the courses that I teach, we have a SharePoint Teams development course. When we start working with Teams, one of the things we have to do is come into setup policies. And in setup policies, there's going to be a global org-wide policy. And we're going to come and we're going to basically turn the switch, which is initially turned off, to on. And then we're going to go ahead and click Save. What can also be helpful is that if we come over to permission policies, note that out of the box, they give permission policies where everything's turned on, but you have to go turn on the setup policy. And then what we could do is we could add a custom policy inside here. And, it's possible then to add what users can see them. But in short, what we need is, let's go to Teams for a second. And note that as you're developing with Teams, you are fine to use either the web app or the native app. Both will work fine. I kind of like the web app as my default because I have the ability to get to the developer tools. If I come back over here and I open up the developer tools, I have the ability to do things like console logs and to see things that are put inside there. It also gives me a lot more control to disable caching when I'm actually making changes in Visual Studio, saving, and I want to see the changes right away. Now, let's go back here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Manage Teams, and I'm going to go to Apps. And what we want to see down here is, if you see the bottom right corner, there's always going to be a link which is create an outgoing webhook, but until you flip that switch in the Tenant Admin Center, you're not going to see the upload a custom app. Now, we also had a bunch of problems this week in class. I had about 14 students who all flipped the switch, and it was just kind of arbitrary where some people, this link showed up in 5 minutes, and for other people, it took 45 minutes. So once again, as you go into the Teams Admin Center and you change those, it might take some time. Okay, so you're going to see Upload Custom App here, and then also if you go to Apps, if you're a tenant admin, you're always going to see Upload a Custom App down here. But when you click on the link, only if you set the settings will you get the option to upload for me or my teams. Okay, so basically I just want to make sure that we have those settings set ahead of time. Okay, now what we're going to be looking at today is the main type of components that you can create as you're developing apps for Microsoft Teams. So the simple one that we're going to start with is going to be custom tabs. And the idea is you produce an HTML page and Teams serves it up in an iframe in its own tab. And so there's also going to be, your ability to run server-side code, whether it's ASP.NET, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core. You could have server-side code that fills the tab, or you could just basically go with all client-side code. And then also there is going to be a JavaScript library, the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK, that you put behind your tabs so that your code that runs in the tab can get contextual information. And we're going to see that. Okay, we also have connectors, and the two types of connectors that I'm going to show are inbound webhooks and outbound webhooks. There's a couple other types, and then there's also bots. Now, let's kind of start by asking this very important question. I think a lot of you have probably kind of asked around. So as I start doing Microsoft Teams development, should I use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code? Think about this for a second. Should I use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code? And so the answer is yes, you should. Either one works fine. I'm going to do some demos with both of them. Okay. Now, one thing that's a very important concept is that when we have a Teams app, we have to build a package, and that package has to contain a manifest, which is named manifest.json. And so whether you're using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, your project gives you the ability to manage and edit the manifest, but then the tricky part is that you have to compress it into a zip archive so that you can actually upload it. Now, one really neat tool is App Studio. I'm not going to work with App Studio today, but I just want to kind of call out that App Studio is a custom app that allows you to create the manifest for other apps. So it's definitely something that's worth learning about. Now, the other important tool that we're going to have to learn to use is NGROK. Now, the reason for that is when we do Teams development, what you need to do is you need to create, either web server or web service entry points that are available across the internet. So Microsoft Teams can, basically make a web service call or retrieve HTML, from your endpoint. And so what we often want to do is we want to do development where in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code I start a debugging session, but my endpoints are then only available through a local endpoint. So by using NGROK, they have a utility that interacts with their cloud-based service, and the idea is that we can then take a local host URL and make it available over the internet. So then I could basically put that information in the manifest, build a solution package, and basically install, my dev time solution package. Okay, so if this sounds a little bit fuzzy right now, we're going to see some examples in just a second. So let's start with developing custom tabs. One of the things that arguably Microsoft could do better is to kind of give you smaller samples. So one criticism I have is that as Microsoft gives you samples, they want you to get to the cool stuff really first, which is bots. But quite often, if they just take a step back, and let's look at a project that just has tabs. So we're going to look at two different kinds of tabs. We have static tabs and configurable tabs. And note that when you define a tab in your app manifest, you give it an entity ID. So you kind of give it an identifier. You give it some pretty text that's going to appear there. And then you're going to give it a content URL. And that's the thing that needs to be available over the internet. Okay, now let's go ahead and see kind of the difference between these two. Maybe I'll come back to this page after we've done our first demo. Okay, so let's say that I go back in the browser, and now what I'm going to do is, we'll go back to Teams, and what we'd like to do is we'd like to add a custom tab to this page. Okay, so what I have is I have a lab that we do in our Modern SharePoint Developer course that I have here. And so let's kind of start out just by starting up the app. I'm going to start up the app because what I want you to see right here is that if we go down here to the endpoint, which is 3000, you can see that here's an endpoint that I want the Microsoft Cloud to be able to reach into. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically start up Teams. And so one of the things that I've already done is I've installed the NGROK utility, so it's available from the command line. But now what we're going to do is we're going to type NGROK, and the first command that we need to learn with NGROK is the HTTP. So I would like to create a HTTP tunnel. Okay, and when I create this HTTP tunnel, it's going to be at port 3000. Okay, and then I need a host header, and because of the way that we're using localhost inside here, actually let me just go ahead and paste this in. So what you see here is I want to create a tunnel, and as I do that, now what you'll see is that in the NGROK service, they've made this thing available. So let's go back here, let's go ahead and hit this, and notice that I can hit the exact same page. Now, if you use NGROK and you don't have an account that you've paid for, you're just using the free version, as many people use, what's going to happen is you're going to have this URL. Notice that this one starts 6963, and then I stop the session, and after I stop the session right here, I'll do the exact same thing. I start it back up again, and now the URL has changed. So if you don't want to pay for an NGROK account, you basically get the strategy of you start an NGROK session and you leave it open, for up to 8 hours in a row, so the URL doesn't change. Now, after you've kind of used this for a while, what you might find is that going to NGROK, creating an account, paying them $5 a month is going to allow you to create up to 3 URLs, or basically URLs that don't change. And so now, watch what we're going to do. We're going to basically add in a host name. So basically, I've registered a couple host names. And so the host name we're going to use here is hostname cptlabs ngrok.io. So what's nice is that now I can stop and start NGROK anytime I want, and my URL does not change. So I'll leave it to you whether you want to spend the $5 or not. If you're just kicking the tires, use the free version. If you're doing this day in and day out, basically paying for it and kind of getting a static URL gets to be important. Okay, but now what we should have is we should have the ability, whether it's me, or whether it's any of you, to be able to reach in and basically see this URL right here. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and shut down Visual Studio. And with Visual Studio, typically your project, has some particular URL inside here. And so Visual Studio, you can basically start up a debugging session, shut it down, start it up again. It doesn't really matter because the URLs stay the same. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is we need to kind of look at our manifest. So you look at the manifest right here, and notice I'm using the most current version that's not in preview, manifest version 1.5. And so down here we have things like the short name and the description, and then we have a couple static tabs. We have a configurable tab. Note that with static tabs, your scope is going to be personal. So they're installed not in the scope of a team or a group chat, but basically just within the scope for one particular user. And then for our configurable tabs, it can either be team scope or group chat. Okay, also note down here, you can put in your valid domains. Now, one issue is that we need to produce a zip archive. Now, this is going to get a little bit tricky here, but one of the things that I'm going to do, and this is the Visual Studio trick, that I've been using for 15 years, is that you can unload a project so that you can then look at the project file in edit mode. And down here, what you're going to see is that we have just a little bit of code as a post-build event, which basically calls PowerShell compress archive. And basically we're saying take everything in the manifest folder and basically build a zip archive, which is named cpt teams app.zip. Okay, now let's go ahead and load the project back in. Now let's go ahead and take my distribution folder, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that for a second. And then I'm going to also come up back here and say, show all files, so I can see that what's behind the scenes of this project. Let's go ahead and do a build. And, as I do the build right here, let's go ahead and turn on and off. And, what we're going to see here is that, as I do the build, I should see that file coming back here. And, well, let me try it one more time. I'm sure it's going to come here sooner or later. Okay, so rebuild, and what this is going to do is it's going to build that particular file right here, and now I should see that zip archive inside there. Okay, once again, let's go back here, Teams, package, and let's go ahead, and there's the dist folder. There's that inside. You also might decide, let's look in here and just make sure that, my URLs are correct. Okay, so now that I have that, I have two things. I basically have an NGROK session running so that this application that is now going to be running inside of Visual Studio, is accessible through this URL or through that internet accessible URL. So now let's go ahead and move back. And at first, let's go ahead and install a tab at personal scope. So if I now go to the apps tile on the left nav, and then at the very bottom, I'm going to say upload a custom tab, and then upload for me or my teams. Okay, so now we'll go down here, we'll find that particular tab, we'll go ahead and add it in. And remember, I'm not adding this to a team, I'm adding it at personal scope. So we'll go ahead, we'll click OK. And after a second, it adds my pages in. And so another thing to remember is that this is actually kind of running live here in Visual Studio. So if we come back here and we take that static tab, and now I'll do something, such as static tab, and we'll say test 1, 2, 3. And now let's go ahead and hit save. and I've saved my file, I come back here, maybe I'll go to the About tab, I'll come back, and it might take a second because it's calling out, and what you can see, is that I can make changes, live. Now, the next thing I want to do is let's look at how to use the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK. So back here, I have this static tab, and what you can see is, just to keep it simple, I'm linking into jQuery, and then here's the Microsoft Teams SDK library file, Microsoft Teams.js, and then I have my static tab. So if I look at the static tab right here, what I'm going to do is when my code starts running, I'm using jQuery just to basically have the document ready event handler, and then we're going to initialize Microsoft Teams, and then I call get context, and I pass a callback function. And the idea is when the context is retrieved, it calls my method. And so note here, I'm just saying context.entity ID, app ID. So I just kind of want to list out, the different things that we can grab onto. Now note there's no information about a team or a channel because it's a personal scope. It's not running within the context of a team or a channel. Okay, now let's look at the next one inside here. So what I wanted to do is also kind of show something that's a little bit fancy. So here's an example, and it's taking a second to load in because it has to call to my machine an individual studio who is busy thinking about something else. But now you can kind of see, here is, an application that I've created with React. So if you can create it with HTML and JavaScript, you can basically put it into a Teams tab. Okay, now let's say that the user doesn't want those anymore. There's the Teams tab there, or if the user goes somewhere else and then later wants to come back to their tabs, they're accessible right here. And then also note that if you have a bunch of static tabs that you want everyone in the company to use, it's also possible to install this at the org level and then make this appear in the left navigation, to make it stand out. At this point, someone has to kind of use the flyout menu and click on this, and then they'll get back to these tabs right here. Or if they want to delete it, it's just a matter of coming back up here and doing a uninstall. Okay, so what we saw there was static tabs. And they're called static because they're just files that you load in. So now let's look at configurable, or what we call dynamic tabs. So let's go to a team. And once I go to a team, I can add tabs, but I can only add tabs from the things that I've already put inside there. Okay, now I should have undone this from an earlier demo, but if I go to apps, I've already installed this here. So let me go ahead and uninstall just to reinstall, make it all official. So the idea is that when you're testing, you're going to come into your team and say manage team. We're going to go to the apps tab, and we should see this upload a custom app. Remember, if you don't see upload custom app, you got to change those tenant-wide settings to allow for app side loading. So we're going to click here. We're now going to add this in, and now it adds these in, and now that configurable tab is going to be available to me. Okay, now let's go back into a channel. Let's now go down here, and I'm going to add a tab. First, though, let's go back, and let's take a look at the manifest. So with the manifest, when I have a configurable tab, I don't point to the tab that I want them to get to. I point them to the tab or to the page that helps them to dynamically create a tab. So there's actually two pages. There is the configure.html, and then also there is the dynamic.html. But the idea is that the configure page, has to point to the other. Now, if we look at the configure page here, I'm going to have a couple radio buttons, and we're going to have this code inside here. Okay, now let's go back here. And so someone now decides to create a tab for my configurable or dynamic tab. So they choose this. And so what happens is my configure page comes up. Now, when the configure page comes up, initially the save button is grayed out. So now if I go back here, what we've done is in the configure page, I've just kind of created a couple radio buttons. But now inside of the code, what we're going to do is we're going to say when you click one of these radio buttons, notice that down here, I'm sure you could figure a better way to do this, but this is just simple demo code. But the idea is that once you click either of these radio buttons, this code is going to fire and call Microsoft Teams settings set validity state equals true. So let's go watch that. I go ahead and click that, and as soon as you set validity state equals true, you light up the save button. So you might have more questions that you ask, but the idea is you provide a form, and once the user completes, the data in as complete as it needs to be, you enable the save button. Now, what's going to happen when someone clicks the save button right here? Now, this code is going to run. So when the code loads in, you basically register an on-save handler. So this code executes during startup, but now this code executes when they click the save handler. And when they click the save handler, I'm going to figure out which button they checked. And now we're going to say Microsoft settings, set settings, and we're going to create this object right here. And this is going to be the tab. Now, one of the things I'm trying to demonstrate here is that you're able to create multiple tabs from a single configurable tab. And just to kind of prove that concept in a simple way, let's say we want to be able to create two different tabs, the blue and the green. And note that when I create the content URL, I'm going to point to the same page. We're just going to basically add a different query string parameter value to each of these pages. Okay, also note that you have a suggested name. So while the user can rename your tab, you're able to come up with what you think the tab should be named, at least to begin with. So for instance, now the user is going to go ahead and click on save. And so now you've written code to create this object that represents the tab. And now as the blue page loads in, and then I have some code behind here, but once again, you kind of saw I was able to set the suggested name, but you really can't stop the user from coming back later, in this case right here, and maybe they want to name something, they have a different way of spelling blue or something like that. Let's go ahead and click on save, and now they've saved the page. But now, let's create a second tab from that same configurable tab. This time, we'll take the green tab inside here. So once again, one configurable tab can create many different tabs inside here. I can go back and forth between these pages right here. And what you're going to see here is just to kind of prove this concept, if you look at the dynamic tab, it just basically looks at the incoming background color and basically sets the CSS, for the tab content. And then one other thing I want to point out here is, unlike a static tab, here we have the ability to kind of see all kinds of contextual information, about the team and the channel inside. Okay, so what I wanted to kind of show there is, basically, how we can get up and running and start using our dynamic tabs, basically using Visual Studio. Okay, now let's say that I want to do something a little bit different, so I'm going to go ahead and close this down. I'm now going to open up Node.js, and with Node.js, what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of create a new project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say make directory MD, and then this will be called Node tabs, because we're creating it with Node.js, and then CD, and we'll move over into Node tabs. And so if you worked with the SharePoint framework, you know that you use the Yeoman generator and you call yo at Microsoft/SharePoint. Well, they have another Yeoman generator for Teams. And I've installed that here, so I'm going to say yo Teams. And now what's going to happen is that this Yeoman template is going to click in. And yeah, I want to name that Node tabs. That's great. Use the current folder. Title of your Teams project, Node tabs, sounds fine. What is the name of your company? So it's going to ask you a lot of information that you can pass on. What manifest do you want to use? 1.5. If you have a Microsoft Partner ID, you can add that in. And here, this is a really neat Yeoman template. So if I want to create things like a bot or an outgoing webhook, you can add those. We're just going to stick with the tab here. So we're going to have the tab. URL, where will this solution be? Now, one thing that I happen to know is that this thing is going to run at 3007. But at this point, let's say that where I would want it to run, might be in my local dev environment. So HTTP, and now we'll kind of put in that cptlabs.ngrok.io. And do you want it to include testing? Not for the simple demo, but maybe for a real thing I would. Do you want Azure Application Insights? No, let's hold off on that. What is the default tab name? For no good reason, we'll call it Elmo. Do you want a configurable or static tab? Let's make a configurable tab. In what scope? Let's put it in team scope. Do you want this tab to be available in SharePoint? Kind of a neat thing, but I'm not going to do that right now. And now it's going to go ahead and create my project. Now, what's really neat about this framework is that it's NGROK savvy. And if you have worked with Node.js, you know that when you start up a project, generally you have something like gulp or some other scripting behind the scenes to help you out and do all kinds of things for you you don't have to do yourself. Okay, we'll give this just another second. And I'm not even going to have to write any code here. We can just kind of rely on the fact that hello world is going to work. So now I'm going to say code dot, because I want to open this thing up with Visual Studio Code. Now you can see that as they build this for you, you have things like the env file right here. Here's the host name. Now what's kind of neat is that while the host name is in here, the host name is only really important when you're building the package for distribution. Because one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run this in dev mode. So let's go ahead and I'm now going to do a gulp and hyphen tasks. So as I create this new project, what are the gulp tasks? And just remember there's one little issue with this, and that is when you use gulp with this framework, it uses gulp 4.0. When you're using SharePoint framework, it still uses gulp 3. So I have gulp installed at the global level, which is 3, not 4, which is why this is breaking. So if you're using gulp, or I'm sorry, if you're using Node.js, there's this trick where if you have npx before your gulp command, that basically says, let's go ahead and look at the gulp version in my project, not the global one. Okay, so we go ahead, we run this right here, and I see that there's a whole bunch of gulp commands, including this thing called NGROK serve. Hey, that looks kind of interesting. So if we come back here and we do a NGROK serve, and what I need to do is put something in front of that, in particular npx and gulp, and now we'll go ahead and run this command right here. So what is this going to do for me? So first of all, it's going to start up NGROK, and you can see that it's just kind of used a random address, but what's nice is that it then builds the manifest for me. So if I go up into the source and I go ahead and I look at the manifest just has these placeholders, which is host name. So the idea is that as you do a gulp NGROK serve, it basically starts an NGROK session. It then comes to the manifest file and replaces the host name. It then builds the solution package. Okay. And then if I come down here and I look at the package, hey, there's this node tab here ready to go. So now this thing is just basically served up here at this NGROK address. So let's go back And now I'll go back to Teams. We'll go back to Manage Team. We'll go back to Apps. Now upload a custom app. This time we'll go ahead and go to Node tabs, and there's Package. And let's go ahead and load this in. And so once again, this is just the default world of this project. I'm going to go replace the text inside the manifest. I'm going to replace the icons, and obviously we're going to replace the code. But the fact that they already have the functionality all done for me, so that now I've installed this app, great. Let's go ahead, move back to General. Let's go ahead and install this. And there is Node tabs right here. Let's go ahead, load that in. Now, the way that this works is that let's go back here, and what you're going to see in source is that under the app, here is the Elmo tab, which is a TS file. Doesn't have all that much in it. But now, as I look around and, here we look into the Elmo tab and here's some HTML files, but as we keep looking inside there and scripts, Elmo tab, all of a sudden, TSX files. So this is all implemented with TypeScript and React. So if you've been using the SharePoint framework, you might be at home, working with TypeScript and React components. Note that if you use SharePoint, maybe you've been using, or the SharePoint framework, you might have been using some of the React components from the Office UI fabric. But now here are a couple other React components that were created by the team that created, this particular project template. Okay, so basically we have TSX files, for the config, for the tab, and for the remove. So we come back up here. I have a value. The hello world code is going to take whatever I enter there and just set it as the entity ID. I can kind of give you a little hello world code that you can build on. But once again, if I come back here, to the tab, I come down here, I can see exactly, how all this, is being put together. And if I had started this up in watch mode, I could simply, and you want to start this up in watch mode, which I didn't. But if you start it up in watch mode, I don't think I started up in watch mode. Let me see. If I go ahead and hit save up on this file, let's see if anything triggers. Oh, I take it back. It did go into watch mode right there. So as I make another change and I hit save, and now what we should see is go off this tab, come back here, and you can kind of see my changes have already taken effect. So a very quick way to kind of work in the actual Teams environment, as you are going back and forth. Okay, once again, what we just looked at there was working with the Node.js Yeoman template files that were created by the Microsoft Teams development group. Okay, let's go ahead and shut that down. And now when we stopped it, we basically stopped the NGROK session from running inside there. Okay, now let's look at one more thing here while we're kind of on the, working with tabs. And that is I'm going to open a project here. And so I have a SharePoint Framework web part. And so in my SharePoint Framework web part here, let's say that I do something like a gulp serve. Let's see what this thing looks like. And so I have a simple web part, classy banner. We use this in our training class. And after a second, it should show up here. Okay, it's making me do it twice. Okay, but here I got something really simple. And so let's go ahead and shut down the workbench. And back here, we'll go ahead and stop. And so now what I'm going to do is we're going to do a couple different commands. And in particular, we are going to do a gulp build. And after I do a gulp build, I'm going to build the project. Now, what I'm going to do is let's look at the manifest. So one of the things they added in SharePoint Framework 1.8 is the supported hosts. So note that by default, when you create a SharePoint Framework web part, they just have SharePoint host. However, I can go ahead and add a Teams tab support, as well. So now let's go ahead and build this. So we're going to go ahead and do a npm bundle -- ship. So we're kind of readying this to push out into production. After I have done that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a gulp package solution -- ship. And once we've done that, now we have built the package and it should be ready for distribution. Okay, so let's now go back here and we're going to go back into the SharePoint app catalog. So let's now go back here. Let's say that I want to go into the files there of that project. So we'll go into our web part, we'll go into distribution, and not distribution, sorry, it's into the SharePoint solution tab. Okay, and there this is. So let's go ahead and drop that in here. So do I want to make this solution available across all sites? So we're going to choose yes to that. And so now that we've done that, we're going to look at files here. And so let's say I take this top project right here and notice that sync to Teams is disabled because you have to have at least one or more web parts that support Teams. So now let's go look at the thing I just uploaded. And after a second or two, well, I can't select both of them. I have to just select one. Okay, but now it notices that there's one or more web parts that support Teams. So now I can bypass the whole need to build a app manifest and to build a solution package and upload it because this takes care of all that for me. Okay, so I go ahead, we sync to Teams. Let's now go back here. Let's go back to Manage Team. Let's go back to Apps. And inside of Apps, we're going to upload a custom app. No, I'm sorry. We are not going to upload a custom app. I take it back. Let's go back here and add a new page. And so if we now look for our friend, and I think it was Classy Banner is the name of that. Okay, for some reason I've not seen it here. Okay, let me try it one more time. Sometimes I find that if I come back here, let's try it one more time. And I'll wait till that button becomes disabled. Okay, there we go. And now let's go back one more time and see if I can get this working. So we'll go to this channel. We'll say add, and what we should see somewhere down here is Classy Banner, and for some reason I'm not seeing it right now. Okay, I'll try it one more time. And okay, for some reason I'm not seeing that, but I'm just going to move on, but that is the technique that you use. Maybe because I've installed and uninstalled, things aren't working properly. Okay. Now let's go ahead and there's a couple more things we want to show. So we got about 15 more minutes left, and let's look at inbound and outbound webhooks. Now this is some really easy stuff to do. So for instance, let's say that we go back here and we go to one of our channels. And so, inside of this channel right here, I'm going to go down and I'm going to say, let me see my connectors. Okay, and down here, maybe I want to add a new connector, and there's this connector which is called incoming webhook. So let's go ahead and choose add. And so we'll go ahead and choose add. And when I do that, I have to give it a name. So we'll call this something like, info blaster. Or I'll just kind of call it the blaster. And if I want, I can put a custom image. I'm not going to do that, but now we'll go ahead and call create. And so now that we have done that, we have a URL down here. And the idea is that we can now post to this endpoint. So I've copied that inside here. Now, let's go back, and we're going to use Visual Studio. And so here, I've tried to keep this as simple as possible. So the idea is I have an HTTP client. I now have some JavaScript object notation, text, hello world, hey, it worked. And then back here, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pull the data from that JSON file inside here. We're going to build the content, and now we're going to go ahead and post. And really all I need to do is kind of put that special URL inside there. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this right here. And as I run this right here, we should be able to go back. Hey, look at that. It worked. If let's go ahead and shut this down. Let's go ahead, one more time, and you can kind of see, hey, it worked. Let's go back here, and we'll do something different. It's a Friday, so we'll be on the verge of profanity. Heck yeah. Let's go one more time. And what we should see is that, in the background, it's posting. Okay, that's kind of neat. But now let's switch it over. Instead of just sending text, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a message that's a lot richer. So I'm going to do a post, but now I'm going to start using a JSON syntax that's understood, both by Teams and Outlook, which allows me to start adding rich content inside. So let's go back here and let's switch out, that simple JSON with something a little bit more robust. Okay, let's go ahead and run this right here. And as I run this, we'll come back over here, and then all of a sudden, you can see that we put something up there. Angry manager alert, someone's in trouble, who ate my sandwich? And then what we can do is we can have actionable things, where you can turn in your peer, go ahead, who did it, click OK, or you can just fess up to it, and get your pink slip and go out the door. But the idea that bots are really neat, but bots are a lot more complicated. So when you look at this incoming webhook, what you have is just the ability to send things and send notifications. You don't have the ability to have conversations. Working with bots, gets to be, what Microsoft is putting a lot of energy into, because it's the one thing that leads the Teams AI story. And obviously within Microsoft, anything that, falls under the umbrella of artificial intelligence, is the holy grail. But to get up and running, you can create bots a couple different ways. And let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move over, into the browser here. And let's say that I want to create a new resource. And what is that resource I'm going to create? And what I'd like to create, let's go to AI. And what we'll see is that web at bot. Now, when you create the bot, you have to give it, some type of a unique name. Let's see if that name, okay, someone's already tricked me. How about if I kind of do the opposite and do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now I'm going to create this bot. What resource group do I want to put this bot into? And once I've put those, Ted's bot demos, that sounds good. What data center do I want it running out of? So I'll pick US2. What is the bot name? And then also, with your bot, would you like the bot that they create for you out of the box, to be C# or some other language? I could also choose Node.js, so you choose the one that you want. Let's go ahead and down here, behind the scenes, it has to create a Azure AD application that has an ID and password. And so one of the kind of neat things, is that you can just have it do all that work. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to choose create. Now that's going to take a second to create. While that's going on, what I wanted to do is just kind of, it's going to take a couple minutes to create. We'll probably have 2 minutes left when it's done. But now what I'd like to do is Microsoft has a bunch of what are called bot builder samples. And there's a GitHub repository. And if I open up this repository and we go ahead and we look at the samples, they have samples for both C# in .NET Core and without .NET Core. I'm going to use the ones in JavaScript Node.js just to kind of show you a couple of them. So let's say I start with this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and open this thing up. And as I open this up, what you'll see is that they have bots that basically are written in JavaScript, not ECMAScript 5, but ECMAScript 6. So you might think, is this TypeScript or JavaScript? It's just kind of the newer version of JavaScript. But if I look at package, so what we're going to do is we're going to do an npm run start or an npm run watch. So let's do an npm run start. So npm run start. And so once I do that, it tells me that something else is still running. Okay, so let's go to my outbound connection and kill that. And now back over here, npm run start. And looks like something is still running on that port. So let me close some other things. And in particular, I'm not sure what was running on that port. Okay, one more time. Could not find bot builder core. Did I not do an npm install on this? Okay, it looks like I didn't do an npm install. What I was hoping to do is to run a couple of these, just so you can kind of see how easy it is to kind of start them up, even though I haven't done a very good job. Let's kind of use one that uses cards here, because I think I've already kind of built this one, so it should be quicker. Okay, so if I do a npm run start, and now this thing starts up on my local machine. So now what I do is I use the local emulator. So when you're using the bot framework, what we need to do is test them locally. And so, here's this case right here where I can go ahead, I can start up my bot. And so some of these bots kind of show you how to work with the rich content. So for instance, here I'm going to respond, and it kind of shows me how to create things like adaptive cards. And down here, it shows me, how to create audio cards, animation cards, hero cards. So once again, to get up to speed on how to use bots, how to add rich content, how to build conversations, I really encourage you to, look at the bot builder samples. One other thing I have to call out to is that if you go to github.com / my good friend Bob German, Bob German has been doing a workshop, and he's basically done just amazing things, with bots inside here. So once again, github.com, Bob German, bots. In fact, I like this so much that I'm going to go ahead and put this, into the chat window and send it to everyone so everyone can kind of enjoy that. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go back and see if our work was done by creating that resource inside of Azure. Okay, so if we go back here into Azure and we say, hey, my resource has been created, great. Now here, I just created this new bot. And so what it does is it basically creates a bot with some hello world code, and you can download the code. You can actually go to an interactive browser and kind of change the code in the browser. You can also test in the web client. Let's say that we come back here and in the web client, it's just going to be a simple echo bot right here. And that works just great. Okay, and now to make this work with tabs, this is a huge move forward. So what's been very hard is that the bot service and bot framework team created version 3 and then moved to version 4. And that got to be very painful because the team's architecture built so much on 3, and there was just huge breaking changes between the two. But now the teams group and the Azure bot group are on the same page, and they've created this channel. So let's say I go ahead and configure this channel, and now we go ahead and we click on, yes, we want to do that. Okay, and now it is saved inside here. Okay, so now I've got this particular channel inside, and what you're going to see is that now it gets to be, very easy to be able to, add that in to basically allow us to call from it, from inside. For instance, let's go to settings, and you can kind of see that, here is where they've put the bot up at this endpoint. But what's really neat is that you can swap out this endpoint right here for one of your local URLs. And so then you could basically hook the bot up, inside of up inside Teams, and be talking to it, but still, have the bot running locally right on your machine. Okay, here you can see Microsoft Teams. If we click on that, we can open it back up again. But now, here's the last thing we're going to show. Get bot embed codes. Let's go ahead and click on that. And notice that there is an href you can put on a page. But I'm going to grab that URL. Okay, and now let's go back here. And so here's someone who's just running in the context of, a user identity within Teams. And down here, would you like to open this application? And I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And so what this is now doing is just kind of making that bot, now available right inside Teams. I'm going to say, hey, and once again, not all that exciting because it's just a Echo bot right now, but now I can download that bot and start working with it. So bots have moved from a very painful development experience to a very easy development experience. Okay, so hopefully what I've done over the last hour is to kind of give you, a view into what you can do as you start working with Microsoft Teams. And then let me just kind of finish up with a quick plug for Critical Path Training. This is something where, we're spending a lot of time drilling into this development effort, creating some good hands-on lab exercises. So the Modern SharePoint and Office 365 Development course, is basically where we kind of teach the fundamentals of using Node.js, Visual Studio Code, how to program in TypeScript, how to use React components, and then obviously SharePoint Framework and Teams development is a central part of the course. So let me go ahead and say thank you, everyone, for coming today. I appreciate that. We will go ahead and send out an email later on with the video recording. And other than that, thank you very much for your interest in Critical Path Training.